We all think we know what failure is, right? It's a missed goal, a door slamming shut, a final verdict on something we tried. But what if we've been looking at it completely wrong? Today, we're going to dive into a perspective that reframes failure not as some external event, but as something happening inside of us. And honestly, understanding this could completely change how you see your biggest setbacks forever.
Okay, so let's really get into this. Our go-to definition of failure is usually something external, isn't it? It's hitting a wall, a project gets shut down, you reach a dead end. But what if the real failure isn't the wall itself? What if it's an internal state of being? Like an emptiness that makes our efforts hollow long before we even get to that wall.
Our whole journey today starts right here with this one powerful verse from the Quran. The key word is tafshalu. That's the word that's translated as fail. But believe me, that simple translation doesn't even begin to capture the whole story. Hidden inside this single Arabic word is a kind of psychological blueprint, and it offers a totally different diagnosis of what it really means to fail. So how do we even begin to unpack that deeper meaning? Well, to really get this Quranic perspective, we kind of have to become linguistic detectives. We need to look way beyond the surface translation and dig into the very architecture of the word itself. Because in Arabic, the root letters of a word, they tell their own hidden story.
And this is what is so mind-blowing about the language. Words aren't just labels for things. The root letters can reveal these profound insights into the human condition. It's almost like there's a psychological diagnosis baked right into the vocabulary itself.
Let me show you a really powerful example of this in action. Take the Arabic word for a tyrant, jabbar. The root letters JBR literally mean to mend something that is deficient or broken. So, get this. From this perspective, a tyrant isn't just some powerful, evil person. They're someone desperately trying to mend their own inner emptiness by controlling everything and everyone around them. Their tyranny is just a symptom of that internal void. Okay, so now let's apply this exact same detective work to our idea of failure.
This right here, this is the whole paradigm shift. On the left, you've got our common view. Failure is an external obstacle, a wall that just blocks your path. But on the right, you have the Quranic view. Failure is an internal void. It's an effort that's hollow from the inside out, like a beautiful, shiny apple that's rotten at the core. The focus completely shifts from what's blocking you on the outside to what's missing on the inside.
And that brings us to the most critical question. If failure is this internal void, then what causes it? See, this framework doesn't just give us a new definition. It actually identifies 4 specific internal conditions that create this hollowness in the first place. So let's take a look at what the 4 true roots of failure really are. The very first root is a failure of trust. This is that seed of doubt you plant in your own mind. It's kind of like a fully grown elephant that absolutely refuses to pull against a tiny little stake in the ground. And you wonder, why? Well, because when it was a baby, it was tied to that same stake and it learned, I can't break free. Now, it's more than powerful enough, but its past belief paralyzes it. Failure doesn't start with the action. It begins in the mind as a self-defeating story we tell ourselves.
Second is a failure of planning. This is what happens when we get so bogged down in arguing about the tiny details of the present. Who's in charge, which method is best, that we completely lose sight of the future. There's a story of a wise king who knew that in 1 year he'd be exiled to a deserted island. Instead of just enjoying his temporary power, he sent workers ahead to transform that island into a paradise. So while other kings faced a barren wasteland, he stepped into a palace that he had planned for all along. The third root is a failure of self-critique, or what we all know as blame shifting. Just imagine a woodcutter whose productivity drops day after day. He's working just as hard, but he's cutting down fewer and fewer trees. He starts to blame his own fading strength. But then a wise man comes along and asks him, hey, when was the last time you sharpened your axe? The woodcutter is shocked, and he replies, sharpen my axe? I've been way too busy chopping. He was looking everywhere else for the problem, instead of looking at his own tool.
And finally, the fourth root, a failure of perspective. This is when we see an obstacle as way bigger than it actually is. There's this great story about a young foal that is terrified to cross a small stream. A tiny rabbit had warned him that its cousin had drowned right there just yesterday. Well, the foal's mother comes along, walks right through this dangerous stream, which barely even covers her hooves, and she says, son, what is a deadly river for a rabbit is just a puddle for a horse. We fail when we let someone else's limitations define our reality. Okay, so now that we have these 4 roots, we can use them as a lens. When we start to see failure as an internal void, not just some external setback, it completely changes how we look back at history and even our own lives.
It forces us to ask a brand new question about things that happened in the past. Was the effort truly hollow, or was it actually a seed for something much, much greater? So let's apply this framework to a major historical event, the Battle of Kerbela. I mean, by any conventional metric you can think of, this was a catastrophic failure. A tiny group was defeated, their leader martyred. But if we use our new lens, we have to ask a different question. Was it an empty, hollow effort, or was this event so filled with principle and purpose that its impact would echo for centuries to come? And here's what happened. That immediate failure at Karbala was the absolute opposite of an internal void. It was a catalyst. As you can see on this timeline, that one event inspired movements and revolts that over the next 70 years directly led to the collapse of the very dynasty they opposed. The strategic long-term victory was just immense. It's a perfect example of how a short-term loss isn't a true failure if the effort itself is filled with meaning and purpose. And that's the bottom line. This is the power of redefining failure. It stops being this final verdict on our worth, and it becomes a data point. A setback is transformed into an opportunity to diagnose what was missing on the inside. Was it trust? Was it planning? Self-critique? Perspective? It allows us to begin again not from scratch, but from a place of so much greater awareness. And that leaves us with one last question to think about. I want you to look back at your own life, at the moments you've labeled as failures. Now, using this new lens, which of them were true failures? Hollow efforts that were born of an internal void. And which ones were just difficult, painful, but ultimately meaningful lessons that planted the seeds for a future victory you just couldn't see at the time? The answer, well, it might just change everything.